In the pre-dawn darkness of March 23, 1976, a 29-year-old adult film actor named Mitsuyasu Maeno took off in a small single-engine plane. He wasn't headed to a film set. He was on a one-way mission. Dressed in a makeshift pilot uniform, he pointed the nose of his aircraft at a luxurious Tokyo mansion, shouted, "Long live the Emperor," and crashed into the home of Yoshio Kodama. Maeno died instantly. Kodama, the man inside, survived. This shocking act of modern-day kamikaze defiance wasn't an act of war. It was an act of furious protest, a desperate scream against a corruption scandal so vast it had infected the highest levels of global power, toppling governments and shaming royalty. And it all revolved around a single American company, Lockheed. This is the story of how a legendary aerospace firm on the brink of failure tried to bribe its way back to the top. A story where prime ministers were arrested, princes were disgraced, and hundreds of pilots paid the ultimate price for backroom deals. This isn't just a history lesson. It's the origin story of modern corporate crime. Founded in 1926, Lockheed built its reputation on groundbreaking designs such as the P-38 Lightning of World War II, the elegant Constellation airliner, and the F-104 Starfighter. But by the 1970s, that reputation was at risk. The company had bet everything on the L-101 TriStar, a new wide-body airliner. Plagued by delays, cost overruns, and the bankruptcy of its engine supplier, Rolls-Royce, Lockheed itself teetered on the brink of collapse. In a move that now seems laden with irony, the U.S. Congress approved a $250 million emergency loan guarantee in 1971 to save the company and 60,000 jobs, a taxpayer-funded lifeline for a company that was already funneling millions into secret offshore accounts. Facing financial ruin and stiff global competition, Lockheed's leadership, including President Carl Kolchian, made a fateful decision. If they couldn't win contracts fairly, they would buy them. This wasn't just a casual graft, it was a sophisticated system. Lockheed maintained a dedicated, off-the-books black budget for these payments. To hide the money, they used a web of shell corporations and secret bank accounts in Switzerland and Liechtenstein. Massive payments were disguised on the books as sales commissions or consulting fees paid to local intermediaries. These fixers, often well-connected power brokers, would then deliver the cash to the intended officials. Kolchian would later controversially defend the practice, calling it a necessary cost of doing business in many parts of the world. It was a secret formula for success, and they applied it across the globe. So what was happening in Japan that could drive a man to such a desperate final act? The answer lies in a massive sales campaign for Lockheed's L-1011 TriStar airliner. Lockheed enlisted Yoshio Kodama, the man whose house was attacked, to be the fixer. Kodama wasn't just any businessman. He was a shadowy, right-wing power broker with deep ties to both the Yakuza and, crucially, the CIA, which used him as a key asset during the Cold War. Through the trading company Marubeni Corporation, Kodama funneled over 1.7 billion yen, around 5 million USD, to higher-ranking officials, the most powerful of whom was Prime Minister Kakue Tanaka. The scheme worked. All Nippon Airways bought 21 TriStars, a deal worth nearly $1.4 million. But when a US Senate investigation exposed the secret network, the scandal erupted. The Japanese public was horrified by the scale of corruption at the highest levels of the government. Prime Minister Tanaka was arrested, becoming the first sitting Japanese Prime Minister ever jailed. Among those ensnared was Tamisaburo Hashimoto, a former transport minister who was convicted for accepting bribes funneled through Marubeni. Though he did not go to prison, his sentence being suspended, the scandal ended his political career and intensified public outrage at the corruption rotting Japan's leadership. And as we saw, public outrage reached a fever pitch with the kamikaze attack on Kodama's home. It was a scandal that shook Japan's political system and forced the country to confront just how deeply money and power were intertwined. But Japan was just one piece of the puzzle. The Senate subcommittee found evidence of Lockheed's bribes in over a dozen countries. In Saudi Arabia, millions flowed to the legendary arms dealer Adnan Khashoggi to secure deals. Payments were also uncovered in the Netherlands, Italy, and West Germany. Everywhere Lockheed went, the fallout looked a little different. In Saudi Arabia, Lockheed didn't have to bribe politicians directly. They had Adnan Khashoggi. Known as the greatest arms dealer in the world, Khashoggi built a fortune acting as a middleman between Western defense companies and the Saudi royal family. He had the connections, the access, and the charisma to make deals happen. Lockheed funneled millions through Khashoggi to secure contracts for aircraft sales in the kingdom. The arrangement was straightforward. Lockheed got access to one of the richest defense markets on the planet, and Khashoggi took his cut while smoothing over negotiations with powerful princes and military officials. Unlike in Japan or the Netherlands, this wasn't a scandal that brought down governments. In Saudi Arabia, the payments were treated as the cost of doing business. Khashoggi's role only became widely known later, when Senate investigators revealed just how much money Lockheed had poured into his accounts to keep the deals flowing. The Saudi connection highlighted something crucial. Lockheed's system wasn't limited to fragile democracies or corruptible officials. It worked just as well in absolute monarchies where access to the right fixer could open doors to billions in contracts. Now, the Lockheed scandal didn't just stop at politicians and businessmen. In the Netherlands, it went straight into the royal palace. At the time, the Dutch Air Force was buying into the NATO standardization craze. The Americans wanted allies flying the same jets, and Lockheed's F-104 Starfighter was one of the main contenders. On paper, the Dutch had options. The French Mirage and Swedish Saab Draken were serious competitors, but Lockheed had a secret weapon. Prince Bernard of Leip Biesterfeld, Jesus Christ, husband of Queen Juliana. Bernard wasn't some decorative prince. He was a war hero from World War II, wore a uniform everywhere he went, and positioned himself as the monarchy's man of action. He also had a taste for expensive cars, racehorses, and expensive living in general. That made him exactly the kind of person Lockheed salesmen loved to work with. Around $1.1 million quietly flowed into a Swiss bank account tied to Bernard. The understanding was simple. He would use his considerable influence to push a Starfighter deal through. And it worked. The Netherlands selected the F-104, joining other NATO members in what critics later called the deal of the century. The scandal might have stayed hidden if not for the US committee hearings in 1975 and 76, when Bernard's name appeared in testimony. Dutch newspapers exploded the story. Parliament demanded answers, the public was furious, and suddenly the monarchy, normally above the political fray, was dragged into the mud. A special committee was appointed, led by Supreme Court President André Donner, and the evidence was damning enough. Yes, Lockheed had paid Bernard. The question was how far the punishment should go without triggering a full-blown constitutional crisis. Behind the scenes, Juliana reportedly threatened to abdicate if her husband was prosecuted, while the government feared that forcing a royal trial could destabilize the entire institution. In the end, a compromise was struck. Bernard was forced to give up all military functions, resign from his many public posts, and retreat from political life. He escaped criminal charges, technically because of royal immunity, but practically because no one wanted to push it that far. The fallout was brutal for his reputation. Overnight, the charming war hero became a symbol of sleaze and corruption. The Dutch monarchy survived, but its prestige took a major hit, and new unwritten rules emerged. Royals were to stay clear of business deals and defense contracts. Bernard himself lived another 3 decades, still attending races and occasionally giving interviews, but he never regained the trust he had squandered for Lockheed's money. Now, what fun would it be to have a video talking about corruption without mentioning a country that is probably better than any other country in the world at this? Italy. In Italy, Money didn't just buy planes. It bought confusion, instability, and a front row seat to how fragile post-war Italian politics really were. In the 1960s and 70s, Italy was ruled by a patchwork coalition led by the Christian Democrats, propped up by a network of smaller parties. Governance was a delicate juggling act. One wrong move and the whole thing would collapse. Lockheed knew this and played the system like a fiddle. The target was the Italian Air Force, which was interested in F-104 starfighters and C-130 Hercules transport planes. To make the sales happen, Lockheed funneled millions of dollars in bribes to top officials. Chief among them was Defense Minister Mario Tanasi, leader of the Social Democrats, a small but pivotal party in the coalition. The bribes had their intended effect. Procurement officials looked the other way, military engineers ignored technical concerns, and parliamentary oversight was, to put it mildly, conveniently distracted. Lockheed got the contracts, the planes got delivered, and for a while, it all seemed smooth. Until the US Senate hearing hit. Italy was suddenly faced with a scandal so big that newspapers ran daily updates for weeks. The revelation that Lockheed had essentially bought a portion of the Italian government shocked the public. People realized that the corruption wasn't just about the few gritty officials, it had penetrated the very mechanism of the state. Tanasi and several co-conspirators were dragged into court not just for bribery, but for undermining the state itself. The trials were messy, drawn out, and in true Italian fashion, some convictions were overturned on appeal, while others served minimal time. Meanwhile, the political fallout continued. The coalition trembled, parties reshuffled, and public trust evaporated. The scandal also had a long shadow. It gave an early preview of the clean hands investigations that would sweep through Italy 20 years later, exposing corruption across the entire political spectrum. Lockheed's cash had done more than secure contracts. It had destabilized a fragile democracy and demonstrated just how much money could bend politics to its will. By the end, the Italian government was left bruised, wary of outside influence, and painfully aware of the dangers of letting corporate interests mix freely with politics. And for Lockheed, the money had bought planes, but it also bought a permanent stain on its reputation, one that would echo across the Atlantic as the scandal unfolded in Senate hearings. And now we turn to West Germany, who in the early 1960s was looking to modernize its air force. The Lockheed F-104 starfighter, sleek and supersonic, seemed like the perfect solution, at least on paper. Designed as a high-altitude interceptor for the US, the aircraft was sharp and fast, but Germany intended to use it for low-level strike missions, which was a role it wasn't designed for. Its narrow wings and high landing speeds made operations hazardous, and these design limitations contributed heavily to the Luftwaffe's high accident rate. The procurement of the F-104 starfighter in West Germany was controversial from the start. Questions soon arose over how Lockheed had managed to secure the massive order. A lobbyist named Ernest Hauser testified that Defense Minister Franz Joseph Strauss and his political allies had received at least $10 million in exchange for approving the purchase of nearly 900 starfighters. Strauss flatly denied the accusation and even filed a slander suit against Hauser. For Strauss, this was not his first brush with scandal. Just a few years earlier, during the Spiegel affair, he had been accused of abusing his office to silence critics in the press. The Lockheed allegations only deepened the perception of Strauss as a man who blurred the line between state power and personal influence. When German authorities looked into the claims, the results were murky. Some evidence had conveniently disappeared, and smaller favors, like Lockheed paying for trips by German officials to visit US aircraft plants, were dismissed as routine gestures rather than outright bribes. In the end, no conclusive proof tied Strauss directly to Lockheed's money, but the suspicion never fully went away. Between 1961 and 1987, West Germany acquired 916 starfighters. 292 crashed, resulting in the deaths of 116 pilots, earning the aircraft the nickname Widowmaker. Investigations attributed the high accident rate to a combination of the starfighter's design, its low-level operational use, and training limitations. The scandal casts a long shadow over Germany's military procurement process. Allegations of bribery and mismanagement damaged Strauss's reputation and highlighted weakness in oversight. The controversy prompted reforms in procurement and stricter rules for military acquisitions, emphasizing transparency and accountability in defense contracts. The scandals in Japan, the Netherlands, Italy, and West Germany made one thing clear. Lockheed's strategy wasn't limited to a single country. Bribes, political influence, and corporate maneuvering had created a global web that reached from Tokyo to Bonn, Rome to The Hague. By the mid-70s, the pattern was impossible to ignore. Back in Washington, the US Senate began to untangle their international threads. Hearings revealed the full extent of Lockheed's overseas activities, exposing a network of payments that had ensnared governments, royals, and military officials alike. Executives like Karl Kochian admitted under oath that bribery had been a standard practice, and the outrage in Congress and the public was immediate. The result was the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act of 1977, a landmark law making it illegal for American companies to bribe foreign officials. Beyond criminal liability, it requires strict accounting standards to prevent secret slush funds. While enforcement was initially inconsistent, the act eventually became a cornerstone of international anti-corruption efforts, shaping how American corporations operate abroad and forcing the world to reckon with the true cost of global influence. Yeah, right. The Lockheed scandal didn't disappear. The bribes aren't in cash-stuffed envelopes anymore. Now they come dressed as lobbying campaigns, PAC contributions, and the revolving door between defense contractors and government officials. The influence is subtler, but no less real. Decisions that cost taxpayers billions, shape military priorities, and affect lives are still shaped by private interest. Lockheed showed what happens when profit and national prestige collide. Rules get bent, oversight gets ignored, and human consequences are written off as collateral. The true cost of a contract isn't just the price tag. It's the policies warped to suit private agendas, the trust of the public eroded, and the lives caught in the fallout. The Lockheed scandal is history, but it's also a warning. It reminds us that the dance between money, power, and politics hasn't stopped. It's just gotten more sophisticated. And it's still happening today. It never ended. It just changed outfits. And as long as influence can be bought, the story of scandals just like this one will never be over. Thank you for watching.